Good morning. So the chapters that she kind of assigned me, the book kind of goes in 4 parts. So the parts title is called How to Lead Change Without Resistance or Resentment. And it's actually something I've been learning through my job, but kind of seeing it laid out in the book was really cool too. One of the first parts of that section, he says, the first responsibility of a leader is to define reality. The last is to say thank you, and in between, the leader is a servant. And so for this main portion of what I read here, he was talking about the first responsibility, so it's to define reality, which doesn't necessarily mean like, here's all the negative stuff, here's all the problems for this job, or here's all the stuff that you're not really gonna like. Because if you started out negatively, whatever the situation is, whatever you're a leader in, or even just talking to someone, even if you're not necessarily their leader, you're both gonna just be like thinking about the negative. And if you are a leader and that's what you're focusing on, now you have to work against whatever negative, like psychological stuff that's going on in their mind, because they have the negative impression of what's going on and they're not even thinking about the positive, because that's how it started out. So really a good way is just when you begin a conversation with whoever it is, you can give honest and like genuine appreciation to that person. So you, have to get to know the person, so you have to be able to learn to connect and get to know them, so you can give them that honest and genuine appreciation. Because sometimes, a lot of times people know when you're being kind of fake, and if it's not genuine, it can make them feel defensive. If you're saying something negative about their character or about what they did, about their judgment, again, they're just going to automatically be defensive. It's something I noticed in my role as a customer service agent. So you say hello, thank you for calling, blah, 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 how can I help you? And the customer, of course, always jumps to whatever negative situation, they're upset, and they're gonna express that to you most of the time. And so it was our role to show them we're on their side. And it's what I most learned at Wayfair, I would say. Like, instead of, like, one example would be, hey, I was double charged, this is ridiculous, you're holding up my money, I need this money for bills and all this stuff. So, like, they're feeling a lot of pressure because they can't pay their bills for this reason. And so my response should be, hey, that's really frustrating. I've been double charged. It does hold up your money, and I completely understand where you're coming from. And honestly, Wayfair as a company, we want to make sure that we're not charging you more than we should. And I see you've been a customer for 2 years. Wow, just thank you so much for spending your money with us. And I'm telling you, that works. They felt so appreciated, and their tone changed like that. Instant difference for the most part. But eventually I'd have to tell them the reality of the situation, whether we did double charge them or we didn't. But it just depended. I'd have to look and see what was going on. But I still had to frame that also in a positive way. Like, you can't just say, oh, we did double charge you, that sucks. Like, like, good luck, man. I would have to be like, oh, well, we'll make sure we take care of this, or, I'd have to, make sure, just show them I'm on their side and that I care about whatever that situation is. But oftentimes when we think about reality, we think about all the negatives, or, it's some bitter pill that we have to swallow, but it's just because we're hardwired that way. We're hardwired to see negative first rather than positive. So you see it that way. You have to acknowledge it as a leader. You have to acknowledge that the person you're speaking to often sees, they see life that way or certain things that way. And he was actually talking about there's different studies conducted by neuroscientists that kind of conclude that we care more about the threats of bad things than the prospect of potential good things in our life. So a lot of times when we make decisions, it could be starting a new business, it could be all these different things. You make the decision out of the fear of what bad things could happen rather than all the possibility of the positive things that could happen in your life. And it also, even like our negative thinking can kind of change our minds on how we think of people or their impression or what the impressions we have of somebody else. Because you can probably think of, a few people right now, and you could probably list all these things you think that they could change or what's wrong, that if they just change this, it would be better for them. And, they have this really negative trait and it's really frustrating. You could probably name 5 people and list 5 things about them that you feel are negative about them. But what we should really be focusing on, especially, is thinking about all the positive. Because if you train your brain and you think about, wow, this person does this and this is amazing, and that's really helped me and helped the team in this way, you can portray that to them and make sure they know that they're appreciated. And oftentimes, if they feel appreciated, before you even get into a conversation with them, like if you have to tell them, hey, there's a lot of times at Wayfair what we called difficult conversations. So your manager would have to have a difficult conversation with you about your performance or whatever the situation was. It is generally they always tried to start out with whatever was positive, whatever you've contributed to the team. But a lot of times they've already built that relationship with you. They've already, before they ever had to speak anything about your performance, the whole entire time, they've been telling you how much they appreciate you, what you bring to the team, and they've been thinking about all the positive traits rather than they've never even really said a ton of negative traits about you ever. And it's just something I've learned from working there and learning about the leadership there, and a really good point that he was making here. And it made me think of just in Philippians 4 when he's saying, think about whatever is pure, whatever is holy, whatever is, all the things he says, the whatever verse. Because, it's good to think about godly things, but it's also just true. If you're just thinking about negative, you're just going to walk into every conversation, every person you speak to, every person you meet that day, you're just going to be thinking negative. Whereas if all day you've been thinking about the positive things, all the whatever things, then it's going to change your view. You're going to be more positive when you enter into conversations. You're not going to jump right to the negative. And jumping right to the negative, honestly, just, again, causes low performance, and your team won't perform as high. Or if it's just personal relationship, it's going to cause strain in that relationship. And so he talks about different steps we can take to kind of avoid that low performance or avoid the negative. So, like I said, we must acknowledge our tendency to jump to the negative. But we don't just need to think positive things all the time. We actually have to rewire our brains to recognize that our perceptions of a person or a situation is not always the truth. So just because you think negatively and you see it this way, one, it doesn't even mean it's the actual truth about that person or the situation. But we can actually rewire our brains. A quote actually directly from the book is, "We can train our mirror neuron systems, which are cells that were discovered in recent decades that enable us to understand the actions of others, to interpret their intentions, and to predict what they might do next." So he's saying with that idea that we might be trained right now to think automatic negative thoughts about people, but you can actually rewire your brain not only think the negative, but to also think positive thoughts, or, in that way, that you're not concluding this is always going to be terrible and negative and this is awful, that you come to a conclusion, you see the positive in it too, which can, when you're coaching somebody or helping them or just talking to them, you get to see you reveal their positive behaviors first. You're not always talking about what's bad, and it helps you with that genuine appreciation of that person if you can focus on the positive. And one of the things that I think makes a great leader, and in the book he states it, what I've learned in Wayfair, is that great bosses know how each member of their team thinks and how they tend to act, and then use that positively. So an example that I had was one of my first manager, or I think my second manager at Wayfair. She took so much time to get to know us. She sent out personality surveys. We would talk about it. We had a whole team page where there was just little snippets about each other, and we could ask each other questions in team meetings and have times to really get to know each other as a team, but she also got to know us. And so I would say as a team, we worked, as one of the best teams I've been on, we worked so well together because it seemed like she cared, and we also felt like we all cared about each other because we were learning about each other and asking each other questions. And I would say that made all the difference, because customer service can be a hard job. You hear a lot of negative things all day. But when you have a team, in any job, there's different difficulties. But when you have a team that really cares about each other and you feel your manager cares about you, I would say it changes the whole environment. And you see the positive, you encourage each other, you help each other. And that's really what she focused on, and it set a tone for open communication. So we could say, hey, I see this, you said this, but, we could say it like this instead. So none of us were defensive with each other at any point that I can really remember, because we had set that tone on the team. And the renewing the mind part actually reminded me just of Romans 12, where God tells us to renew our minds. He tells us, so there is some science to back that up, but even if there wasn't, the Bible says we need to renew our minds. So it's something that we can focus on, obviously, with the stuff the Lord teaches us through the Bible, but also just within our relationships with other people. But one thing he kind of warns about, which is called the mum effect. I hadn't heard of this before, but this happens because we want to avoid becoming the target of others' negative emotions. So we make something sound more positive than it actually is. So you can tell one person, hey, this was really fantastic. We did this, this, and this. But you make it sound like it was more awesome or better than it actually was. So you just want to stay positive, essentially, without causing drama. Because if you're telling, if I tell my manager, wow, this program really worked. We did this, this, and this, and these were all the positives, and it was amazing, and the number and everything was just great. But I'd never told her anything else, and there was actually a few issues with it that I should have relayed to her or to him. But now my manager has her managers to speak to. So now they have to tell their manager, so they're going to be all positive, and they might even do the same thing and make it sound more positive than it actually is. So we just have to also make sure when we're being positive to not just dramatize it or kind of fudge it or make stuff up. And then some steps to genuine praise that he mentioned is, of course, the praise you must offer must be heartfelt and genuine. And it should not be a tool to buy time while you think of the criticisms for that person. So you can't be like, wow, you're amazing. You're always on time. you really make this team just, you always say positive things about the team. You're always helping the team out, but you're late every day, and, that's just, like, why can't you just come on time? Like, what's wrong? What are you doing? Like, that obviously just makes them super defensive. So I think a key point is, rather than offering criticism, like thinking about all this criticism you could offer, you would want to think of constructive advice for that person. So a lot of times with difficult conversations, another thing that I've learned is, or just in conversations in general, but when you're going to that person and you say, like how we did it at Wayfair, is I see you've been late a couple times. What's going on? Are you all right? Is everything okay with you? You're usually a top performer. You're always here on time. I can really rely on you. And I really appreciate that you've done this, and this for this team. And so what's going on? I want to help you in any way that I can. So when you say that to somebody, you're going to get a much different response. They'll be like, oh, my kid's been sick, and I can't bring him to daycare, and my husband's out of town, so I'm just having a really difficult time making it on time. It's usually, there's a reason why someone's doing that. Most people don't just want to be late and, suck at their job or suck at what you've... So if you accuse them, though, they'll be defensive, whereas if you go at it from the positive and you show that you want to be helpful to them, they'll care more and be willing to work with you on whatever that situation is, or to work with you on that problem. So instead of using but, you can use the word and to kind of make a smooth transition. Because if it sounds but, you're like, but, they'll be thinking, oh no, here it comes. Whereas you say, and this, whatever you have to say, it sets a more positive outlook and creates a positive path forward between you and that person in that situation. And just one last thing is just kind of all this topic in general reminded me, it just made me think of Jesus' leadership. Of course, he was primarily a servant, in his leadership style, but he, just like reading the Bible and seeing how he did things, it just amazes me. So the verse this really reminded me of was John 21, and starting in verse 1. It says, after these things, Jesus manifested himself again to the disciples at the Sea of Tiberias. And he manifested himself in this way. Simon Peter and Thomas called Didymus, and Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, and the sons of Zebedee, and two others of his disciples were together. Simon Peter said to them, I'm going fishing. And they said to him, we will come with you. They went out and got into the boat, and that night they caught nothing. But when the day was now breaking, Jesus stood on the beach, yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. So Jesus said to them, children, you do not have any fish, do you? And they answered him, no. And he said to them, cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find a fish. So they cast, and they were not able to haul it in because of the great number of fish. Therefore, that disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it is the Lord. So when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put his outer garment on, for he was stripped for work, and threw himself into the sea. But the other disciples came in the little boat, for they were not far from the land, but about 100 yards away, dragging the net full of fish. So when they got out on the land, they saw a charcoal fire already laid, and fish placed on it, and bread. And Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish which you have now caught. Simon Peter went up and drew the net to land, full of fish, and 153. And although there were so many, the net was not torn. And then Jesus said to them, come and have breakfast. None of the disciples ventured to question him, who are you, knowing that it was the Lord. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and the fish likewise. This is now the third time that Jesus was manifested to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. So when they finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" And he said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Tend my lambs." He said to him again a second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And he said to them, "Shepherd my sheep." He said to him the third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." And Jesus said to him, "Tend my sheep." So what this really made me think of, because Jesus told Peter that he was going to deny him 3 times. So like Peter went into the situation kind of knowing what he was going to do. But Jesus wasn't like waiting on the shore to like, "Wow, you did deny me. I even warned you. Why did you do that?" Like, he didn't jump at him. He just loved him. He had compassion on him. And there was no like waiting. It's kind of like that wanting to be right thing. When we want to be right, it's almost like we wait. And we want to be like, "Yeah, I'm right. And I'm going to tell you why I'm right and why what I'm thinking matters." And whereas Jesus was never like that. He never went into any situation thinking, "I'm better than you. I know more than," he wasn't coming at it from that kind of attitude anyway. He came at it from like a compassionate, and he just cared for people. And, I just know that I want to be like Jesus. And I think different aspects of this book and even learning about it has helped me. And, I hope it can help you guys. So.